Greetings. Welcome to Dr. English Book Lovers Book Club. I'm Dr. English and I teach English. This week I'm going to go in a little bit different direction. I've had a couple other books that were nonfiction that I've talked about, but this week it's a very personal book that I want to talk about. It's called Wholehearted Faith, and it's by Rachel Held Evans with Jeff Chu with Jeff Chu. And there's a little bit of a backstory to this book because I followed Rachel Held Evans on Twitter for a long time and was really just struck by her faith and her beliefs. She was raised in a very Southern evangelical household, but Rachel had questions, and I really admired and honored her questions, because some of the questions that she had are questions that I too have. And so as I was following her on Twitter, I was just astounded by how she would be in conversations with people. And then I found out in the book that sometimes the people really upset her. But this book was finished posthumously, because while I was reading and keeping up with her, I also was aware at one time in 2019 in the spring that she, had not long before that had a baby, and then she was ill with a urinary or UTI, a urinary tract infection, and then she said that she wasn't feeling well, and she said she was going to go into the hospital because she was not feeling well. And she just said she wasn't feeling well, and then the next thing I know, her husband is posting that she had the infection, and then they gave her an antibiotic that did not work, and she had an adverse reaction. So there's a couple of things that happened. So I also want to point out too, another personal thing was, this was the last book a good friend of mine, a monk, my friend brother Andrew, this was the last book he ever gave me because he had cancer for several years, and this was the last book he gave me because he knew how I had followed her and how much I admired her thinking and her questions about faith that were just they were just so genuine and honest, and I really appreciated that about her sincerity about that. And so it took me a little bit of time to actually pick it up and read it, because I was sad about what had happened to her, and I was also very sad because my really good friend had cancer, and I just kept putting it off, and then this summer I finally took it up and said, you know what, I'm going to read it no matter how sad it makes me. So it was one of those books that, and I wasn't sad while I was reading it. I was just enthralled. I finished it really quickly, but I also took time to meditate on it too. So I think, if you read, you have to meditate on the reading that you are doing. And this in particular, I really felt like I had to meditate and think about it a little bit. So that's the backstory on that. And so these were a collections of she had started on the book, and then there's one section that was kind of like the Wholehearted Faith part of the book she was working on. And the other half is like essays that Jeff Chu actually kind of went through and tried to make sense of. So it's two parts. But you don't really hear his voice, although I am reading his book called Good Soil, and I'll talk about that, in the future. But I feel like he did a really good job of maintaining her voice in those pieces that she had been working on, and then he kind of just cleaned it up and finished it up posthumously for Rachel Held Evans. And so I think this reading that I'm going to read is really kind of gets at the heart of Rachel Held Evans, and about her questions about faith and belief. And so it's the very first chapter on part 1 of Wholehearted Faith. The Wholehearted Faith there's like a prologue, and then there's it's her husband and Jeff talking about the whole situation. But this is the first chapter, and I'm assuming she started off, this is where she started. On the days when I believe, the sun streaks across these East Tennessee hills, showing me that green isn't one color, but a million. The infinite deep blue of the sky feels less like an endless void ready to swallow me whole than an open and generous invitation, beckoning all of us who are prone to wander. On the days when I believe, the raucous laughter of my kids sounds like the prelude to a grander symphony, a promise of unadulterated joy to come. On the days when I believe, I regard the tulip tree outside my kitchen window and learn from it. Rooted but flexible, it adjusts to the seasons, offering its abundant nectar to bees and butterflies during times of flowering, and then seeds and shade to birds and squirrels after that. On the days when I believe, I feel enfolded in a story so much greater than my own. It's a story that knits together 1,000 generations of saints, which is to say, folks like you and me, who wrestle with their questions and their doubts, who interrogate the systems and structures of the society around them, who search for a way to make sense of it all, and who wonder whether they belong and whether they're loved. It's a story that makes audacious claims about a man God named Jesus, and calls us into his outstretched arms. On the days when I believe, a prayer feels as if it's just another beautiful beat in a long-running conversation. Nothing is withheld. Everything finds its place, and whether lament or hallelujah, I'm convinced it is all heard because it's a whisper into the ear of an attentive God who loves me and whom I love. And then there are the other days. Some days I don't have words for my own prayers. Fortunately, I can fall back on missives to the divine written long ago and spoken by the hopeful and the hungry. I think, for instance, of one particular old prayer, one of the oldest, in fact, a Bronze Age construction first uttered in the language of a nomadic tribe, toiling in the dark, perpetuous earth of the fertile crescent. Its words have greeted every sunrise and sunset for more than 3,000 years. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. From the moment human beings could speak of the mystery we call God, we have spoken in terms of total devotion, or at least the possibility of it. Heart and mind, body and soul, love that envelops the entire self, no holding back, no fear. I too memorized these words long ago, promising, as the scripture says, to impress them on your children, to talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, and when you lie down and when you get up. The simplest message here is that life of faith cannot be lived half-heartedly, and the faith I profess and pass on to my children requires nothing less than absolute allegiance. This gets complicated on the days when I'm not sure I believe in God, or at least any version of God like the one I grew up with. So that kind of gives you a really good sense of what the book is about. And I know this is not really a book that you would probably have in a secondary English classroom, and I'm not going to talk about that as far as being a teacher. This is more just more personal for me, that I wanted to share that this book is really a wonderful book. Although I would say, if you are someone who is working in a school that is affiliated with some denomination, and you have students who have doubts about things or are questioning, because my school's kids really do start to question those kinds of things. And so this is a book that you may not have on your shelf in school, but you might suggest it to a student who is struggling with the kinds of questions and doubts that Rachel Held Evans had, because she came to those questions, past high school. She talks a great deal about like what she was like in high school, about the always wanting to get, all the Awana awards when she's a kid, and wanting to get the best student in her Christian high school. It just makes me laugh out loud. And then she looks back at that and thinks how obnoxious she was. And I just think it's really kind of funny. And so, because once she got away from home and got away from, and she went to a Christian college too, but it's like when she got to be in college, she began to ask a lot more questions, and she wrestled with a lot of the doubts that she has, because she would see some of the injustice of things, and it really made her start to question things a lot more. So, but she's such a good writer, and she has such a clear, articulate voice about her own struggles, that it's really you just feel empathy for her, and you really think, it's nice to know there's someone else who may, be thinking like you, which is, a lot of kids need that. I think a lot of young people need that right now, where they see some of the things going on and question, wait a second. And that's really actually where she, actually got to as well. And it's like, this isn't right. And so I think, if you have a student like that, that's an opportunity for you to say, here's a book that might, this might resonate with you, and that's a real gift from any teacher. I never have been someone who understood why, we need to have prayer back in school, and I always thought that was the most ridiculous thing I ever heard, because I always thought, any kid at any age can say a prayer in school. We live in the United States of America, where you can have freedom of religion wherever you are. It's not a state sponsored thing to have prayer in school. Anybody can pray at any time in their whole lives, anywhere they are. So I find that absolutely ridiculous. I've always thought that was one of the craziest things I ever heard, because kids can do that, adults can do that wherever you are, in anywhere in this, you know, public, private, whatever, So, um, so I think that's something that people have forgotten. It's like, wait a minute, why are you making these arguments for a state-sponsored kind of change, which is exactly why the Puritans and the Quakers left the UK, so they wouldn't have to be Anglican. So I find that kind of funny. But anyway, I do highly recommend it. Like I said, it took me a little bit of time to read it, because there were so many emotions I had before I read it that I needed to, kind of progress through before I could get a chance to read it without crying. So, thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye.